it's, it seems to be more of a setup for a conversation about the way Black women are expected to sacrifice themselves to save other people.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show at the movies.
Like Brown Girl in the Ring, but with 1,000% more whips.
That's true. A lot more whips in this movie. I'm Sean.
I'm Alex.
And on today's show, we'll discuss Brown Girl Begins, a 2017 film directed by Sharon Lewis and starring a number of people. Mona Traore, Nigel Shawn Williams, Shakira Saida, Emmanuel Kabongo, Rachel Crawford, Andy McQueen, and Misha Berger-Gussman. And I hope I have gotten all of those right, because I did practice. So this is the second part of our book and its adaptation sort of feature. Previously, we discussed Brown Girl in the Ring by Nalo Hopkinson, and this film is sort of a prequel rather than a traditional adaptation, so we'll come back to that in a hot minute.
But before we do that, a friendly reminder that we want to hear from you. And imagine me, pointing at you like I'm Uncle Sam in that World War II poster. We want to hear from you. Share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener-suggestions. All one word. We want to put together a listener mailbag episode with your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and more, so get those thoughts in. If you want to send in geology questions for me, I will answer them while 3 sheets to the wind. You have my word.
That's great. It'll just be just like when you reviewed The Core.
Yes.
Also, just as a little note, we've been bad Patreon folks because we don't necessarily always thank folks on here who are on our Patreon page. And so I am here to say thank you for continuing to support us, but also to call out a few names. Folks like Janet N., the Profound, Scott the Dadicus Rex and Mary the Queen Mother, Jeff X the Gracious, Daniel H. the Cultured, Escape Artist the Empirical, Robin H. the Bold, and Heather R.J. the Magnanimous. Just a few of the names. There are many more, and we'll get to a few of them next episode. But thank you all very much for supporting the show. Some of you, it should be very obvious who you are, and others, you only know who you are because you're on our Patreon. So thank you.
You're the best.
It's true.
All right, now for the main event. We are going to talk about Brown Girl Begins, not Brown Girl in the Ring like the script says.
Sorry, I didn't fix him. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, give me shit for not reading a line that wasn't even correct, Sean.
I'm a bastard. Damn it. So, Brown Girl Begins as an interesting film. It is effectively a prequel. It is somewhat explaining events that precede the main events of Brown Girl Begins, more particularly discussing how Ti-jeon becomes somewhat of a sort of medium for the spirits and also her relationship with Tony. And so the main part of this is showing Ti-jeon's reluctance to take on this role, but in a way that is, I think, quite distinct from the book in that it is automatically assumed by Ti-jeon and by everybody watching the film that she does in fact have these powers. And so the main story is Ti-jeon watching as a child as her mother is unwilling or unable to become a conduit for Papa Legba, and unfortunately dies as he attempts to use her as a vessel. And it is about eventually her reluctance and eventual admittance to it, of learning to come to terms with who she is and her role, as we learn about the things like Rudy engaging in witchcraft, this figure of Crack, for example, who has changed into a woman with a whip, who basically hooks people on drugs for experiments, and all of those kinds of things going on. But the basic story is just that Ti-jeon learning to come to terms with the fact that she is being asked to be a conduit for Papa Legba, but doesn't want to do it, her romance with Tony, and the eventual fallout.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting story, to say the least.
Yeah, I found, maybe because I had read Brown Girl in the Ring so recently, I did keep getting distracted by there being, these, things that were definitely different.
Yeah.
I mean, even the setting is a little different in the sense that it is Toronto, but instead of it being like the abandoned city center that has been walled off, they've all been like exiled to this island and the lake is poison or something,
Right.
which I'm honestly assuming the reason for the setting change is because they could get, locations at this, what looks like an abandoned factory just fine, but, trying to get like abandoned, war-torn, post-apocalyptic downtown Toronto is probably way above the budget the movie had.
Yeah, so a lot of the decisions about this film really come down to budgetary considerations. So the fact that it's a prequel, for example, is almost entirely, and Sharon Lewis has talked about this, because just they didn't have the money to do the actual story itself, which required them to be, in effectively the city center. So you're totally right that the decision they made for shot locations, and there aren't many shot locations, we should note, it's like mostly different shots from around the same building as most of the shots. And so there is definitely a constriction here. I will say, though, that despite that, the film does quite a lot with its limitations. And I think that's really interesting, because I remember mentioning to you when we talked about Brown Girl in the Ring, was I was wondering how they were going to treat the spirits, right? The gods. And I think for the most part, the decisions made here I really enjoyed them. That the main figure here is obviously Papa Legba, or Papa Legbara as we knew him, or Prince of the Cemetery from Brown Girl in the Ring, and he is presented differently here in that I find him much more scary and imposing here, which I think is somewhat more how I think readers might want to expect him to be, even though in the novel he comes across as much more just very eccentric. This one he's very aggressive. But then you have one of the other gods played by Misha Brugger-Grossman, who...
It's Ashe.
Ashe, who is presented as using song, and so they actually use the strengths of an actual soprano opera singer for that role, and so she sings, and I'm not sure what she actually sings. She may actually be singing words, but I thought that was a really interesting choice to kind of make her almost ethereal and very musically inclined, and I think that left a lot of room for trying to like interpret how she's presented in the story, because like Papa Legba, I don't think we need to interpret terribly much. It's kind of obvious what he wants, but for her it's less overt. It's much more abstracted because they use the music as the primary way she communicates. So I thought those were interesting choices that the film made.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, and this is also, I want to preface this by saying this is obviously me speaking as someone who has only read the book and watched the movie and is not like terribly knowledgeable about the sort of theology surrounding these spirits. But one thing that did kind of like get on my nerves, like I liked the costuming and the makeup and the design for Papa Legba and for Ashe. I didn't like the way the movie changed the relationship between Tijan and the spirits, especially because Papa Legba is such like a very kind of scary figure and very aggressive. Where like in the book he's much more just like a very like a trickster spirit. And like the entire conceit of like, well, he wanted to use Mijan as a vessel and she was too scared and it killed her. That honestly bugged me a lot.
Yeah, because in the book, again, right, the Mijan, well, we think that she is dead, but the reason we think she is dead is that she's run off, and Grosjean has argued, like, she must be dead. And we just all have thought she's dead because she disappeared and all of those kinds of things. And so when we find out that she's not, it's actually a big surprise. But the reason that she's not dead is involved with the spirits, but it's not for the reason shown here. Here, it's kind of harder to argue that she's not dead when we have Tijan actually witnessing her being destroyed by Papa Legba.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, to me, I would not have made that choice. And to me, it seems like it's meant to heighten the tension of the story.
I mean, it makes Papa Legba really scary because basically, especially like when you see him in the movie, basically kill Mijan by like kind of stabbing her with his cane while he's yelling, "Open up!" I was just like, "Whoa, woo!" That was one of the kind of the scarier moments of the movie. Whereas, like, I mean, it's not like Brown Girl in the Ring implies that the spirits are warm and fluffy and cannot harm you, but, like, the entire point that gets made in Brown Girl in the Ring is that, like, okay, so they think, you know, part of why Mijan, they think she's dead and is because she ran off, and the reason she ran off is because she has the same gift of sight that Tijan did, but she didn't want to be trained, and she went crazy and ran off. So, like, the danger that's present in Brown Girl in the Ring that has to do with the spirits is not like, oh, the spirits will fucking kill you. It's that if you mess with these powers and let the spirits ride you when you haven't been trained, it'll make you go nuts. Which feels very different from just sort of like, you know, I'm going to force you to attempt to be like this vessel for the spirit, and he will just straight up kill you. That I did not like.
There's an aspect here that I think that in the book it is a stronger narrative component than it is here. Here it's sort of like, but we don't quite fully understand the stakes of why she needs to do this.
Yeah.
Except for what's told to us. I mean, we understand that Rudy's bad, and that's kind of shown to us in some, like, tablet images. And we understand that Crack is bad, and Crack here has been changed into a woman with a whip, and the whip, like, cuts you and makes you burn, and, like, it's kind of a whole thing.
Like, it's got, like, an electricity component, too. I mean, the whip is, like, you know, sure, that's
fun.
Like, that's actually a really interesting weapon for them to have decided to give to her as a movie that's entirely about black people.
That is true. Yeah, and we might have to come back to that because I think we should also talk about the changes to the henchmen. But yeah, so like this film doesn't set up in the same way that the book does the big issue that's going on. Because I could see, like, if you wanted to make this change because you wanted to make the spirits maybe less approachable, in the sense that, like, from a human perspective, the spirits are actually, like, this very much outside of what is our normal experience. Like, I could see that you make Papa Legba, who's sort of, you know, Prince of the Cemetery, he's kind of like the progenitor of death or whatever, and life, we should note from the book. I could get why you'd make him scarier, but to me, then the stakes of the story need to shift enough so that we understand why her reluctance to do it has much larger consequences. And we don't have that here, other than some mentions that Rudy's very bad. And I think that I don't think you needed to solve this by having lots of expensive shots. I think some really well-written dialogue could have done some of that work for this film. And so actually here, it might have been nice if maybe Poppy Legba, like, takes a hot moment and is like, okay, Trickster me is going off for a second. Let me explain what's going on. And, like, so you understand why this is a whole big deal. But we don't really get that. We get some dialogue, but it's really him just being very pushy again. And there is an element here that I don't think you can ignore in this film, that it is a male-coded figure asking to use a woman's body. You know, even though it's a spirit and a god, and I get that, and there's a separation there, but it's a very strongly male-coded figure asking to take control of or taking over a woman's body, which I think is something that can't exactly be ignored here.
I mean, which is interesting because, you know, comparing it to the book, most of the really overt commentary about misogyny is gone, you know, and part of that is because we don't really get to, you know, we don't know Rudy as a figure. He's just sort of like a guy who's evil. And so we don't have that. I think the choice of making Crack female was really interesting, but that also really undercuts the sort of patriarchal violence, which I think, like, there are ways that you could take, like, female henchmen and still make them vehicles of patriarchal violence, because as we've talked about previously, you know, women are just as capable of enacting that kind of violence on each other to protect their own place.
Yeah.
But it didn't come across like that at all. Like, and the only other place where I was like, I got like that a little bit was, like, say when Tijan and Tony are kind of arguing, and you can tell, like, Tony really doesn't like the fact that she's kind of becoming the main earner for their little couple.
Right.
And he feels kind of threatened by it. But otherwise, there's just really, it's not nearly as about kind of patriarchal violence as the book was.
Yeah, I think you're right that some of the thematics that are from the book that I think probably shouldn't have been. I mean, this is a prequel, so there were obviously we could have expected some making up of things to fill in some gaps and some changes because it is an adaptation and change is inevitable in adaptations. But
Oh yeah.
there seem to be some important thematics that are in the book that you can't get rid of without dramatically altering the kind of story that you're going to tell. And it seems to me that this needed to be like, to me, I don't know why you didn't have Rudy presented. It's just another actor. In fact, you could have had one of the actors plays like two characters. Just get one of the other actors to play a second character.
Yeah, because that's true. Because it's the same guy who plays Brookfoot is the guy who plays Legba, right?
Yeah, precisely. And there's a moment when Tijan actually looks at him and there's like a transposition over the two shots between Papa Legba and Brookfoot Sam. So to me, I think like that thematic of patriarchal violence, I think needs to be here. I think it's like still there, but it's just muted. And where it's overt is not in the places where it actually should be overt. I mean, the book's central thematic when it concerns the spirits is the spirits are things you don't trifle with, but they're not inherently bad. Right?
Yeah.
They have their own interests that may not align necessarily with your interests, but they're not malevolent entities. They're not trying to hurt you, with the exception of Rudy, because they want his ass dead.
Well, yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is, I wouldn't even say, like, what I actually got thematically about the spirits was not even like, oh, you know, they're like these natural forces you don't mess with. Because there's the entire thing about, you know, like the purpose being to have a relationship with these spirits and to serve them rather than using them for your own purposes.
Right.
You know, obviously, I don't know if she's ever going to get to make a second movie, but I'm like, I don't know where you get from Papa Legba as he is in Brown Girl Begins to that kind of thing, or if it's just like a completely different theme and the spirits are kind of like more scary, unknowable things. But in the book, they were very much like, you know, these are like ancestral spirits and they're very like kind of like interwoven and important, and you need to have like a relationship with them. And kind of like the entire point of Rudy's evil was that he didn't.
He violated that relationship.
Yeah, he violated all of that. The way Tijan heals it is by fully accepting that and welcoming all of the spirits into herself and all that. And again, like, I don't know how you'd go from where we are at Brown Girl Begins to that being the conclusion, because to me, kind of like the main thematic element I got out of this movie, which I feel is also like a conversation very worth having, it just makes it a very different story, you know, in that way from Brown Girl in the Ring, is that it's, you know, it seems to be more of a setup for a conversation about the way Black women are expected to sacrifice themselves to save other people.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly possibly here to a degree.
I mean, just the entire thing where it's all, like, there's literally times in there where, like, Tijan and Mijan get called sacrifices.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I think at some point, like, Papa Legba is kind of, like, lecturing Tijan about, like, all of this hope and tradition and expectation that's been placed on her, and she can't turn her back on it, and she needs to sacrifice herself and take this up to save the people. Now, I mean, it's also very unclear, like, why, from what, you know, how is that going to fix anything, etc. But it is all very much about, like, all this pressure being placed on Tijan to possibly die in pursuit of a goal that she doesn't even really seem to understand, but it's for the good of everyone but her.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the big problems with the way that this film is structured, is because it exists as a prequel to a story we already have part of an ending to, in the sense that Brown Girl in the Ring actually has a conclusion in which Tijan actually learns about, you know, the spirits and makes herself open to it. It's trying to fill in these gaps, but by doing that, it has added material and story that makes that next piece not possible anymore. It has to be a totally dramatically different interpretation of that work. Which I think is interesting because how often does this ever happen where you get somebody doing a prequel adaptation to essentially someone else's world that isn't an existing franchise, right?
Yeah, like, I don't think I've ever heard of it happening, so...
It's probably happened a handful of times, but this is one of the only ones I could think of coming up. And so I think some choices are being made here just to try to like create a bit of, because I mean, if you think about it, right, go back to the book, right, the stuff that we learned that had happened before the book's story begins. Mi-jeon disappears, Tony and her break up and she gets preggers. That's the brunt. And Brody's done some stuff to like get into power, but like that's not, it's sort of like some hints and references, but for the most part, it's not really part of the story. That story is, I think, not the part of the novel that interested Sharon Lewis. Because Sharon Lewis, like, that story is before Ti-jeon even really knows what this whole spirit business is. Like, she knows her grandmother is spiritual and like, prays to the spirits and all of that. But, like, she's not had her visions yet before she finally comes back and starts having them. She's not come into any awareness and being. And so, to make a prequel that is about those things, but also make them overt in the story, Sharon Lewis has to tell a different story. One that already brings forward a bunch of elements that are in the next component. And I think that, for me, it while I really appreciated a lot in this story of like how they tried to treat the spirits and tried to make them interesting with fairly limited resources, doing a lot of interesting, I think you were noting, like interesting stuff with the makeup decisions and, some of the shot selection about how they're placed and the use of music and these kinds of things. I think that this is a story that needed more. It's fine if you wanted to do a different take on all of this, but it needed more to ground all of that, because otherwise at times it feels disjointed.
Yeah, I have some bones to pick with the script, mostly because I felt like the script spent a lot of time like telling us what was going on. Like I wanted it to tell me less. And I do kind of wonder if some of it is, maybe she like tested it out on some people and they were like, I don't understand what's going on with the spirits. And, she was like, oh, we need to add more explanation and repeat it a couple times because this audience doesn't get what the fuck's going on. But I actually got a little frustrated by that. I was like, please tell me less.
In parts, in like moments, there's moments when it tries to tell us things that it probably doesn't. And there are moments when it doesn't tell us things when it probably should.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I honestly didn't really feel like there were many moments where I was like, oh, stop. I need you to explain this to me. About the only one I can think of is like when Ti-jeon is going back into her portion of the abandoned building and sees like the plant and just has like this immediate stroke of genius where she's like, oh, well, this can totally like combat the drug addiction. And I was like, whoa, I need you to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Where is this coming from? But that was honestly the only moment. Otherwise, I was like, please tell me less.
It's the MacGuffin plant.
It was the MacGuffin plant. I was just like, really? Oh, well, okay.
I should rephrase myself then. Yeah, I think in general I agree. Maybe it's more that I want it to show some things to us rather than tell it. Yeah. Like, I think the opening stuff, I think I'm kind of okay with that because it's like, oh, there were riots and all of that. It's kind of to set the stage.
Well, yeah, I mean, they kind of had to give us, like, what is functionally the opening crawl. And I mean, that was for you, Sean, where they told us what was going on, but they didn't also put the text on the screen and read it to us.
Which is my biggest pet peeve in cinema of all fucking time.
Yeah, so I felt like that was actually really good. I was like, okay, cool, I understand what the situation is going into this.
Yeah, but like later on, there's just some things where it's like, okay, but we need to understand all of the stakes a little bit more. Like Crack is, let's talk about Crack. So Crack gets turned into, in this story, is a woman who carries this electric whip, who is also experimenting on Melba before Melba has been zombified.
Yeah, though, I mean, Melba doesn't get zombified in this universe because she's dead.
Is she dead?
There is literally, okay, so
she is kind of dead, isn't she?
No, not kind of. She's super dead because there's, like, the whole thing where, Melba takes the last thing of the miracle cure, and then she's kind of like laying there, which I know is like slightly. I also had a question initially about, is she actually dead because you can see her breathing? But considering both Ti-jeon and Crack say she's dead, I think she's supposed to be dead.
Right, and this is part of the MacGuffin plant's problem, which is it gets you unhooked from Buff, the drug in this, basically crack, and it gets you unhooked from it, but the consequence is if that you start doing it again, and while you're on this stuff, it kills you.
Yeah.
And so she dies. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Because I keep forgetting that she becomes a zombie, but like that's what crack's trying to do. She's trying to like zombify her.
That was actually, okay, another moment where like they tell us a thing and I'm like, you need to actually show us this, because it's like after we first met Melba, which is, I mean, Melba is just amazing because she's wearing this lime green wig over her black hair, and you can see that she's just wearing the wig over her hair. But, you know, that's fine because she's supposed to be like basically a strung out prostitute. But like they're like walking over to Brookfoot Sam's thing, and Tijan is immediately like, oh, Crack's trying to turn her into some kind of like zombie with this drug. And I was like, where the fuck is that coming from?
Yeah, I mean, there's things where I think that I'm going to keep using that phrase. There's just some things in this adaptation that aren't grounded because they're things that are like coming from the book or coming from somewhere, but they're not anchored to anything in the story in a way that makes them make sense. And I think that sometimes shows up in like some of the shot compositions. There are moments in this where I really enjoyed the decisions on how to shoot things. Like I absolutely loved every single Ashe version with Misha. I thought those were nice. I mean, could you made them a little bit more? Sure, you could have gone like extra with it, but I really liked those shots. But then there's other shots later towards the end of the film where there's like 2 or 3 different sequences happening kind of all at the same time.
I got so confused.
And it is a bit confusing.
And the only way you can tell that they're different sequences is I want to say Tony is wearing like a slightly different sweater in each of them.
Yeah.
And that confused me super bad. I had to actually go back and rewatch that.
I think it's intended to be a little bit confusing, but I find that sequence doesn't work, because I think it's supposed to be increasing the tension so that we can get to our denouement at the end. But it doesn't. It more just makes you go, what the hell is happening right now? And I think that those are just some efforts of like, we're trying to be clever with how we're shooting these stories, and we want to have lots of things that are really important stake things, but we don't necessarily want to have those in the story proper. And so I feel like if you were going to do this story, maybe Rudy isn't like the big bad, it Crack's the big bad.
Well, and the other thing that was weird about Crack was, like, they say at the beginning that Rudy made Crack. So,
right.
Like, what I'm kind of getting is that Crack is actually supposed to be kind of a stand-in for the Duppy, but...
Oh...
That's what I'm thinking was the implication from the Rudy made Crack. Because otherwise, without that one line, you're just like, she's a lady with a really cool hairstyle and a whip, and she's bad, and she's like Rudy's number one henchman. But, and I almost wish that they'd kind of gotten a little bit into the thing with the Duppy, but I have a feeling that, like, that was another one where, you know, they didn't have any kind of effects budget.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but you're completely right. That Crack has become an amalgamation of like all of the henchmen from the book and the Duppy.
Yep.
Because the whole thing with the Duppy isn't electric, but it's more like fire, but like melts off your skin and stuff. And the idea behind Crack is that with the whip that she uses, she basically cuts you open and burns your skin with electrical burning, and then you continue to burn afterwards in like some sort of like they're poisoned or something. That's really interesting. I hadn't noticed it till you were mentioning it, because now it's sort of, now I really wish they had brought in Rudy so that we could have something more than just telling us that Rudy created her, but to have just a moment of that dialogue with her so that we could see, because like the whole big deal with her, right, is that she's serving Rudy, but she's like trying to prove herself that she's capable of all this stuff, but we don't have Rudy there to kind of be the threat vehicle that we need. And I think that's really important, because I think Crack is obviously a big deal on her own as a villain here, but given this is intentionally meant as a prequel, we need that sense of like, we basically need to do the thing where it's like the big bad of Avengers 1 is Loki, but it's actually Thanos.
Yeah.
That's what we kind of need here.
And I mean, it would honestly, I think, almost have been better if we just had Crack, and you just know that Crack, like, is serving some kind of gang leader, and then at the end you get the implication that actually it's, like, way more fucked up than that, and there's, like, some spiritual stuff going on, and then
you just do that. You do a shot towards the end, as she's returning to her grandmother, and you show him, like doing his like evil villain thing where he's maybe casting a spell or actually zombifying somebody or doing something horrific. And that's the end of your story. That to me would add so much more here.
Yeah. It's little things like that. I mean, like, and I still, like, I loved watching Crack get punched. Like,
That was fun.
that was still very effective.
Yeah.
I was a little mystified by, like, Tijan's breastplate of power.
Yeah, that was another thing. It's another MacGuffin. Yeah.
Well, I was just like, why was this necessary?
And it's like a button, right? Because so it's like this magic breastplate that like Brookfoot Sam gives her, that if she turns it on, like she can affect how much Papa Legba rides her.
Yeah, I'm not sure what, and I mean, like, another kind of implication that I was like, this would have been really, like, honestly kind of interesting if they developed it a little more, because obviously, again, for like budgetary reasons, they did not have the jab. That's right. It's the jab, right?
Right. They don't have the jab here. It's mentioned, but not in it.
But, like, the fact that they have Brookfoot Sam and Papa Legba played by the same actor, and you even get, like, that transposition, I was like, ooh, so is Brookfoot Sam actually Papa Legba kind of, like, in his trickster mode where he's like, I'm gonna be, like, the stick and the carrot, where, like, as Papa Legba, I'm, like, yelling at her, and as Brookfoot Sam, I'm giving her, like, advice and helping her find her way. And that was, I was like, I think that's the direction it's going. So in that light, the breastplate of power makes a little more sense, because he's being like, here, I will give you the feather that you can put in your cap so you can believe that you can fly, but you actually don't need it, but it's just there to help you, like, unclench enough to do what you need to do. But, that's only my supposition and perhaps reading too much into it.
I actually think you're right, because I don't think that it is an accident that the film has that moment where Tijan sees Brookfoot Sam and then sees Papa Legba as Brookfoot Sam in that one moment we get. I think that is precisely what's going on, and I think that it's unfortunate that the film, I think, needed just a little bit more to help the viewer get there, because it's implied, but I think they could have made a little bit more of a bigger deal out of that.
Yeah, because I feel like it's kind of like me and the thing with Rudy Made Crack. Like, as I was obviously saying earlier, like, don't tell me so much, but this is one where I'm just like, you don't need to, like, have somebody be like, oh shit, Brookfoot Sam was Papa Legba all this time. But just, like, I just needed just, like, just a tiny bit more so that I can feel confident in my reading of it, instead of being like, is this really what was going on, or is this just what I'm hoping it was?
I think what would have helped, and I don't recall seeing this, is having the reverse also happen. So when you see that transposition between the two, one where it's Brookfoot Sam turns into Papa Legba turns into Brookfoot Sam, but then the other way as well, because she interacts with both of them in their different contexts, and I think that would have helped to give us a little bit more visual metaphor to play with.
So I feel like so there was another scene where initially I was just like, this is just, like, bad editing, but now I'm wondering, it's, like, near the end where she's, like, yelling for Papa Legba, and then, like, Brookfoot Sam just, like, shows up to talk to her, and you're like, where the fuck were you? Like, why are you inside this? I haven't seen you. And I'm just like, But then Tijan doesn't seem to feel like there's anything weird about it, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like maybe the story wanted that to be what we pick up, but it also raises the big question of why doesn't Tijan make more of a deal out of it? Because clearly she should be able to see. She's the one actually interacting with both of these. But maybe it's also like a Clark Kent problem. Like when he's Papa Legba, like he seems a superhero. When he's Brookfoot Sam, he just seems like a normie.
I mean, yeah, well, I mean, they can't be the same person, because Papa Legba has, like, that amazing, like, false eyelash on one side, and Brookfoot Sam has a crutch. And Papa Legba doesn't have a crutch, so how'd he walk? Smart guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Clark Kent when he wears glasses. Nobody can tell.
Well, I mean, what was that? It's that joke from Mystery Men, like, he wears glasses, the other guy doesn't. Well, he just takes them off. Well, then how would he see?
Yeah. Mystery Men's a good movie. I love that movie.
I love it so much.
It's so good. It's on Netflix right now, just letting you know.
I mean, I have a copy of it, but I encourage all of our listeners, if you've not seen Mystery Men, especially, like, sorry, I know we're supposed to be talking about Brown Girl Begins, and we will get back to it in just a second, but I will note, like, Mystery Men is a cult movie because when it came out, there had not been enough superhero movies for people to get what it was doing, but I feel like now is the time for Mystery Men because we've had so many superhero movies.
I can only turn invisible when no one's looking.
Yes. Anyway, now I do want to say, like, I don't want this to be just like a feast of negativity. Like, I want to say all of the actors were like just giving it all they had, which was excellent. Like, I loved all of them.
One of those a blues singer.
Yeah, one of the guys that Tijan helps, right?
Also the woman who plays her grandmother is also a blues singer.
Oh,
Shakira
she
Saeed, I believe.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's okay. So I will say, like, you know, I feel like there is a lot about the movie that I'm like, it just, you know, a little more refinement or a little, and honestly, what all that comes down to is they just needed more money. And I mean, the fact that the director and the producer had to be the same person tells you a lot about what the budget was like. But the one part where like, I wasn't looking at it and being like, oh, you know, this was on a shoestring, is like the fucking costumes looked amazing.
Well, and fun fact, one of the awards that this film did in fact get was for best makeup, which is related to costumes.
Yes.
So, because this did receive 2 Canadian Screen Award nominations. I should say they didn't win the award, but 2 nominations in 2019, one for the best adapted screenplay and one for best makeup, which was Carla Hutchinson for the makeup and then Sharon Lewis, obviously, for the screenplay.
Oh, the makeup was fantastic. And I mean, the costumes were great. I mean, and I don't mean just like what they did with Legba and what they did with Ashe, like just even the stuff that they had for like Tijan and for Tony, because that is also like a super important part of costuming is like what normal person clothes you put someone in and what it says about them. You know, especially when you consider that they were operating on a shoestring. Everyone looked fucking amazing.
Yeah, I thought that visually, the way that they presented all of the characters was very well done. You know, and even with what they were doing, I thought some of the set choices were even pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, for what they had to work with, I mean, like, you and I can look at it and be like, this is obviously like, they had like an abandoned factory building or I think it might have even been a grain elevator, I don't know, but like that's what they had to work with, but they used the shit out of that and they were like, okay, so from this angle it's going to be this building and from this angle it's going to be this other building and here's like, you know, a maintenance shed and that's going to be Brookfoot Sam's. They did so much with what they had.
I think it's actually commendable because
oh yeah,
I feel like there was some thought into this when they got what locations they were going to get of like, because I think it's all literally the same place.
I would not be surprised because, you know, like I was a producer for a short film, like an short film, and let me tell you, just trying to do like location shit is a fucking nightmare and everything is too expensive. And you're like, well, these are the locations we want. And then you look at the budget and you're like, we can rent a house from Airbnb and shoot there.
Yeah.
And this house will be like every location.
And you know, that's a thing that, you know, I take into account when I'm thinking about what I think about this film, like how good this film is and all of that, because to me, and this is my view, you may differ, but like to me, a film with a very big budget that fails is far much more of a tragedy than a film with almost no budget that fails. Because while money doesn't necessarily buy the things like the writing and all of that kind of stuff, when you don't have to worry about how your sets look and your costumes because you've got millions of dollars, right? To me, it feels like you should not fail on those points. But when you don't have that money and you still, like this film has almost no budget and it does amazing work with costuming, right, and makeup with a very rudimentary
and had
budget.
amazing actors, which, I mean, everyone did really great, and God knows, you know, maybe most of the budget went to even paying them, like, I don't know, but...
Well, and some of them have gone on to have pretty respectable careers, working in television. Muna Traore was just interviewed by some Canadian program about, you know, the fact that she, like a lot of actors, are out of work last year due to the pandemic, but was talking about all of her screen work that she's done. She's done a bunch of television. So, I mean, even the fellow who played Papa Legba, he plays two characters, and he it took me a minute to figure out that they were the same person because they are totally different. And the accent he puts on for Papa Legba, I thought was really well done.
I'm totally with you because, I mean, like, we're sitting here and we're just being like, we wish it had done, like, different things, which is interesting since pretty much all of our complaints have been, like, script choices, which are fixable, more or less fixable to a certain degree. I mean, the fact that you can look at this and be like, I know you were on a shoestring and you still made something that was just gorgeous and had a lot of really good stuff in it, as opposed to, like, like a Marvel film or whatever that's got, like, a huge multi-million-dollar budget and it's just full of CGI that looks like ass. Give me this movie any day.
Yeah, I mean, because there's interesting stuff going on here and interesting choices. I mean, this is one of those things that I worry a lot about, like, the franchise way of doing genre fiction, which is that, to me, I worry about it collapsing down a cinematic style into, like, a very narrow tunnel of what films can be like. Yeah.
I mean, like, when you come down to it, remember when we were talking about, like, Space Sweepers?
Yeah.
We were just, like, creaming ourselves over, like, how different it looked in just in the way it was being shot and the way they did action and the color palette it was using, because it came from South Korea. Wow, when I say it like that, it makes it sound like a horror movie. It came from South Korea. But, like, so they're not in that sort of, like, blockbuster action tentpole groupthink bullshit where, like, everything is cyan and orange and there's a bunch of, like, slow motion shit. They're having a different visual style, and, like, every fucking thing looks pretty much the same for the big budget stuff with its, like, desaturated bullshit color and CGI use. And I mean, like, honestly, I don't like Zack Snyder, but at least he has a distinctive aesthetic, and so does Chris Nolan.
Yeah.
Almost anyone else, I could look at a movie and I can't fucking tell who directed it and who did the production design, because it's just like, it looks like every other fucking movie.
Yeah, but, like, there's this sense of, like, this collapsing of all of these visual styles, and so films like this are doing interesting, different things, sometimes that don't work out. I want to see more stuff like this. I mean, we've covered a few of these kinds of films. Like, Ex Machina was a very interesting film, done on, not on the same level of budget, obviously, but done on a relatively small budget. Or films like It Follows, which was done, I don't remember how much that cost. That cost, like, very little. And yet was, I thought, remarkably well done and well shot. And this film, I think, could it be better? Sure. But it does a lot of very interesting things visually. It makes some interesting choices in order to shoot things that, you couldn't have done from the book at all, just on the budget that's available. So they made decisions that helped them to do different variations of those things. Even though I think Papa Legba here is more scary than he perhaps should be, the acting is really, really good.
Oh, he's excellent. Like, I mean, he's fucking scary. He sells it.
He does. He's really good. Nigel Shawn Williams playing Papa Legba. He also plays a Jab at one point, although I don't recall seeing it, so it must have been the voice. And then Brookfoot Sam, right? And you have Emmanuel Kabongo as Tony, and I thought he did Tony quite well. He did really well.
I mean, like, I will say the one thing that this movie did as kind of like a prequel is it made me understand what Tijan saw in Tony.
Yeah, like he's kind of suave a little bit, Yeah,
well, and he's not like, I think it does a good job at kind of pointing out he didn't start out as a piece of shit.
Right, that's a big thing, because his storyline in Brown Girl in the Ring is that he got addicted to Buff and then basically ruined his life, and she couldn't trust him to be a father. This, they kind of shifted a little bit to, actually, the conditions of their existence are such that he started working for the posse and now has really no choice but to work for Rudy directly on more serious things like selling Buff. And of course, Tijan can't accept that, and so she goes back to Mammy. But I think it's a really interesting choice here to do that. It is, I think, well done. And you kind of understand it, and you understand where she's coming from and where he's coming from. And it's really well done.
Yeah.
Look, all I'm saying is this film does not deserve a 3.5 on IMDb. out of 10.
I mean, when you look at some of the shit that gets a high score on IMDb, you just know that you're like, I cannot trust this level of taste.
But I think we've hit the point where we got to give our last quick thought and a grade of this film, as we do for all At the Movies films. So, Alex, what is your last thought and your grade?
My last thought is, I still, like, this movie is so visually cool looking, and I just want to say, like, the lady that they cast as Ashe, like, I know they cast her because she's like an opera soprano and all that, but every time I saw her, I just kept thinking about, when you see, she's got an open heart surgery scar. Every time I saw her, I just thought about, like, how that relates, perhaps entirely by accident, but maybe not, considering they made the choice to put her in a dress that would show that off. How that relates to Brown Girl in the Ring and what happens to Grosjean.
Oh my god. I need to watch this movie again, because I missed that.
Yeah,
Whoa.
she's got, like, if you look, she has a completely vertical scar down her sternum.
Oh my god, symbolism! Symbolism!
Yeah, and I was sitting there going, I don't think that's makeup. I think that's actually hers. I'm not being intrusive enough to go try to figure it out, but I think that might just be like one of those things where maybe, you know, the actor came in and she had this and they were like, oh shit, we need to put you in a low-cut dress, baby.
Well, great. Well, I'll have to rewatch it now. What about grading? How would you grade this then?
Oh god, that's hard because, you know, it's that sort of like, you tried some stuff, some of it didn't work, visually it was amazing, you know, I wish that we could have talked a little, you know, like you'd given the script a little more like of an edit and a polish, I don't know, so, oh god, I'm gonna give it a B-, just because the script had some problems.
That's honestly kind of where I'm at, actually. You know, I think I want to be really, really clear here that when we're giving it like a B-, like, that's not a bad grade. I realize, like, in America now, like, if you get anything less than an A+++, like, it now is perceived as you've basically failed and you will be, you know, living in a Taco Bell dumpster for the rest of your life. But that's not what a B- really means. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that this film does some very interesting things. It makes some interesting choices. Some of the acting's great. We've talked about things like some of the visual styling, etc. All that's really great. But there are script problems. There are things that just don't quite work here. And some of that is stuff they could have fixed beforehand. And some of it is things they might not have been able to fix. But either way, it does have some impact on the film. But I think it's worth seeing. And so that's why I would also give it a B-.
I mean, if nothing else, you know, how often are you going to get a chance to watch a science fiction movie for which the entire cast is black?
That is also, I think, something we had not mentioned until literally this moment, but the entire cast in this is black.
Well, and so is the director, and I mean, you know, and no one's like shoehorning Martin Freeman in there, so we have like a token Caucasian. It's just everyone is black, and all of the actors are just amazing, and I'm glad to hear that they're getting a lot of more work.
Yeah, some of them are definitely working a bit more. Yeah, so it's pretty nice to see. So, well, okay, we've done it. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today for At the Movies. Obviously, if you have any thoughts on this film and you want to let us know, or you want to just throw something else at us, head over to skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions and give us your comments and thoughts. As always, follow us at Skiffy and Fanty on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. Finally, if you like what we do and you want to help us do things like pay for transcriptions for our episodes and doing some other wild projects that we have, go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty and join us and support the show. You get access to all kinds of cool stuff, so yay. And give us 5-star reviews on iTunes and Podchaser. I would just note again that Podchaser is doing a thing for every review they get for a podcast. They're donating 25 cents to Meals on Wheels, and for every reply that a podcast gives, they double it. And I will be replying to any review we happen to get. So, as always, you can find me at Sean Duke on Twitter, seanduke.net, or patreon.com/thejoyfactory.
All right, and you can find me at Katsudonbury on Twitter, katsudon.net, and on patreon.com/AlexAxe. I would like to note that it has been how many weeks and how many podcasts, and only now did I realize we've been giving the wrong URL for my Patreon, because I am very smart.
Good for you, Alex.
At least I caught it eventually.
Good for you. All right, folks. And on that note, I just want to say that very much like the river in Cleveland, the lake that was in this film also is capable of lighting on fire.
Apparently it's capable of melting people, so
It's
don't mess
just
with
like
it.
Dante's Peak.
No! There will be no Pierce Brosnan doing push-ups in this film. No token Caucasians. Out.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
You're welcome, citizens. You're welcome.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.